Welcome, Drink with James, episode 44. They let me out of the conference room again. I am with not any guy named Patrick, not just a guy named Patrick, but the guy named Patrick in his beautiful apartment in SoHo. Spoiler alert, this episode's already over. We've already talked about a lot of things. You guys are in for a fucking treat. Patrick is the whole modern day Renaissance man thing gets thrown around, but I think it actually is apt for you. He has
thank you.
a business that throws these insane events that you're probably never going to be able to go to. He's got a business called Liquor Cabinet, which is amazing. He is a guy named Patrick on Instagram, and you probably do other things.
I mean, I do a lot of other things. I don't always kiss and tell.
So this is a treat, y'all, and we're going to go over a lot of amazing stuff. Stick around. I think easy starting point is just walk us through how you came to have a following, and how you came into this world, because you didn't kind of wake up and say, I'm going to be a fashion influencer.
Right. Yeah, that was never my goal. For me, the entry point was Instagram, because I loved using images to show a snapshot of what I was doing. I've always been a very visual person. And so being able to take this medium that really was about a moment and reconstruct a moment that I was feeling and do it in a way that was also able to convey that sort of artistically is really what was interesting to me. And then add to that the community of Instagram, and add to that following. And for me, initially I worked at Bon Appetit magazine, so I was highly involved in the food world. And I was also, just being in New York, which is in itself like an aspirational sort of thing. All of those things kind of combined, the artistic endeavor, the community, the content, all contributed to building the following.
And a big springboard for you, I remember, was the CFDA Instagrammer of the Year award, right? Which you won.
Right.
And we actually met. We were on a shoot for Tom Brown together back when I used to shoot more, and they were like, oh, this guy's gonna come along. He just shoots an iPhone, and I was like, my feathers all ruffled. I was like, what?
I didn't know this part.
But that's kind of where we met, and you ended up winning that. And I think at the time, did you have as much of a fashion focus? I remember you did kind of shoot the city and your life beautifully, and you're obviously well dressed, and that was a part of it. But it wasn't you weren't shooting as much fashion at the time.
Right, totally. I mean, I still think today, anybody that follows me knows that I'm not in every post. It is true that I probably had even less of a fashion focus at that point than I do now, but it's always really been about what I'm interested in, a sort of well-rounded view of my life. I think at that point I was actually just more hesitant to be in my photos, and that was the time that was all right, gotta do this. If that's what people are seeing, if that's what people are enjoying. So it definitely, I think, propelled that part of what I do, but it really is it's always been about a balance of all of the things.
And how do you, I think being someone that has a lot of interest and you talk about a lot of things, do you get into the nitty gritty of okay, my food posts usually get this kind of engagement, and my posts of myself usually get this, and the shots of New York get this? Do you let that affect the way you create content, or are you still just I want to post this, I'm going to post it?
Well, I think it'd be crazy for anybody to be oh, it doesn't affect me. Of course I look at a post and I know generally how people are receiving it. Who's to say though that it was the food and not the particular stylings of this food, or exactly what it was. But at the same time, it really is important to me. We were talking earlier about the fact that I went on a bicycling trip with my family, with my dad and brother, through the mountains of Colorado. And that is not something that is typical, me in cycling gear in the mountains.
That's great.
Well, thank you. It's important still that I look good and that I maintain my reputation. But at the same time, I'm more interested in showing an accurate reflection of my life, or the things that interest me, than I am necessarily in if this post is going to get more likes than not. I err on the side of let's showcase the things that I'm really excited about.
And you do so much. And we were just having a conversation before about I do think there's also a bit of an air of mystery about you. Even though you are letting us into what you're doing, are you letting people in as much about how you're feeling, you know, some of your personal like things you've struggled with, or whatever that might be, or just like your day-to-day like life? Because it is like, oh, I'm doing this thing with Spring Street Society, I've got this liquor cabinet, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm traveling, and it's hard to sometimes know, who's this guy, what does he do?
Right. Well, you know, I had to decide my tagline. My tagline is "Man About Town." I had to decide at one point, was it "Man About Town" or "International Man of Intrigue"? Not really. But I think that I love that idea of like not fully giving away everything that you do. I mean, one of the companies I co-founded, Spring Street Social Society, is built on this idea of a gathering that happens for one night only, or maybe 2 nights only, in a secret location. You find out the location the day of, and then you attend, and all of these surprises happen. So I naturally like to play with this sort of like, what do I disclose? What do I showcase? And I think with Instagram specifically, like with social media, or actually no, Instagram specifically, the platform is not built on a sort of like negative, opinionated soapbox, you know? That's what Facebook is for. Also, you know, I tried once to like leave an Instagram post that was like, I hated the service here and I only left pennies as a tip. It was really bad. But like, this is after like 5 times being to this restaurant, and it sucked. And like, I left that post and I was like, I don't really feel like that's what this thing is for. Like, I want to show the most like the highlights of my life. And that's not to say that I don't have days that I'm like not feeling great, or days that I look like shit, or like days in which my apartment is not put together. But I don't feel like I'm ignoring that. I'm just really showcasing the things that are really like the most exciting parts of my life.
I mean, you were saying before, I mean, we live in New York City. This is an aspirational place to live. There's so few a percentage of the population that will ever get to visit here, much less be able to live here, much less be able to live in a beautiful apartment and do things that they love to do with beautiful, amazing people who are creative and doing interesting things. And I think that it is, you know, it's not much different than the role of traditionally fashion magazines, which was to inspire people and say, like, this is the lifestyle I want. I want to be a GQ guy. What's a GQ guy wear? What kind of cologne does he wear? What kind of car does he drive? How does he talk to women? How does he, you know, act at work? And I think that there's you keep it pretty curated in that.
Yeah, well, I mean, so my first job when I moved to New York City was working at Bon Appetit magazine, as I mentioned. So it was my first real glimpse into the editorial world. And you know, I worked with so many people who were really good at what they did and were like amazing cooks, or like knew food, or like understood the way to kind of like communicate these things. And then there's like the photo person who knows which photographer they're going to use and which one is off brand. I learned so much about what it is to really construct a brand and to showcase your point of view. And the fact that like, it's not inauthentic to not show all of the other things, but there is a lot of power in being able to like finally curate your point of view. And so I also think about how I post and the content that I create, sort of like a magazine. This is my, you know, and it's, for me, it's sort of a travel, fashion, you know, it has all food magazine, it has all these different elements, but it's really also centered around the way that I experience them and my point of view. And so I've learned a lot from like traditional media. And then that, you know, I think that can go into like how then you work with partners in building in sort of like advertising content into the brand that you've created too.
Yeah, and to that point, obviously, magazines are incredibly structured in the way that they create content. They've got columns, they've got things they know they need to fill. How much of your feed, as you sit on a Sunday night here in your apartment, how much of it do you know what's getting posted over the next week? How much of it is like, I know I need to go out and take these kinds of photos and do these kinds of posts? And I'm saying outside of your normal, you know, any sponsored stuff that you might be doing. Are you planning those things out?
Honestly, not really. Outside of the sponsored content, it's really just like what I'm doing that day. It can be challenging because sometimes I'm like, you know, I haven't posted an image of myself or, my outfit, or haven't posted food, or because I've been like really like knee deep in work, and I've just been going to the office every day. So I do sometimes need to take a step back and kind of like make sure that I'm doing a good job of representing my interests, and also keeping a breadth of content there. But I don't actually do a lot of strategic planning.
And are you doing a lot of like, the stuff you're posting, you're generally kind of capturing it at that time?
At that moment,
like,
yeah.
Oh, you know what? I think I have a good food photo from a month ago I can use that I haven't posted.
I mean, honestly, I could probably count on a hand the number of times that I posted something retroactively and made it seem like it was happening in the moment. It's a difficult thing to do, to always have like fresh content in the moment. But and not that everybody needs to do that, but for me particularly, Instagram has always been about like this diary,
right.
And I've always communicated it in the moment, and I think more than anything, I love the reward of having people respond to what I'm doing, whether it's a restaurant I'm eating at, or like the rainy streets of New York. I took a photo this morning on my way to work, and having like that like timely reaction, to have other people experience things at the same time that I'm experiencing them, which just goes back to the root of why I have like loved this platform so much.
Yeah, and that is fairly unique, honestly. I think, especially at your size and level.
Yeah.
Most people, it's always funny to see like influencers who you maybe follow on Snapchat and Instagram, and they're posting like they're in one country, and they haven't been there for a week or two.
Right.
And it's just like,
I usually give myself a day.
Yeah.
I'm like flying back. I'm still posting from like Bahamas.
Yeah.
But like after day, I'm like, all right, that's probably that was enough.
Yeah.
But I will say, I actually am very specific about this too when I'm working with partners. Part of the strategy and the way that I kind of construct my calendar when working with partners is I'm very specific about knowing when the timeline for the campaign is, and knowing what my personal activities are. So for instance, in a couple weeks I'll be in LA. I shot some, I was working with Banana Republic. I am working with Banana Republic. I shot some content for them last time I was in LA a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
Knowing that I was going to time the rollout for the next visit, because I didn't want to suddenly be shooting like palm trees and beach when I'm still in New York.
Know you're in New York.
Yeah. So that has to happen because of the approval process,
Right.
and because just like the nature of working with a partner. But I go to great lengths to make sure that it's all kind of like fitting together in a real way.
Yeah. I mean,
and it's fun.
Yeah, and you crush it. You do a great job. And I think that is difficult when your life is so varied, and I think part of the reason you can do that is you shoot everything yourself on an iPhone still, which like a lot of people started that way.
Right.
And I think especially with the advent of like the cameras with Wi-Fi and all of that, where it becomes very easy to move into more like professional cameras. But your photos it's frustratingly good.
Oh.
They are on the iPhone,
Well, I mean, this is something that I take a lot of pride in, being able to like take this pretty like simple machine with not a lot of breadth of capability and do something that I think is really beautiful and that other people are surprised by. I totally fine if you want to use a professional camera and post on Instagram. Like, I don't care. For me, it's just sort of like that's one of the parameters I put around myself as a creator. Part of the reason I've done that is because I think it's such a, again, going back to like the root of what the platform is, I think it's such a cool thing that we all have this tool. Like, we're literally, what we're looking and receiving the content on is the same thing that we're using to create. So it's like super democratic. Like, we're like the playing field has totally been leveled.
If everyone has the same tools.
And if you can sort of like shine in that environment, then it's a really rewarding thing.
Yeah.
And so also just the like logistics, like I wouldn't have been able to take the shot going to the office today in the rain if I'm not using my iPhone, because that's like the thing that's actually on me the whole time.
So even if you have a camera bag, you're taking it out, you miss the shot. And your shots, you have, and I've been following you for years, you have like, I guess, what am I asking? Is like, how are you doing a lot of work to set things up? Like when you're in a restaurant and you take a lot of shots of like, you know, where you're standing maybe 15, 20 feet back from a bar.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be a bartender making a drink, or there'll be a waiter walking through. You always have like a little.
I love that you notice those moments. Yeah, it's important.
You have a little something. Like I remember being on the Tom Brown shoot with you, and we stopped at
Shake Shack.
Shake Shack.
Yeah.
You know, and you took the tray, and you had a couple people reach in and reach in different ways, and you were fairly.
I still love that photo, by the way. It's like one of my favorites.
Yeah,
like all these Shake Shack burgers, and the only reason you know it's Tom Brown is because you see the little like stripe inside the.
It was great. It was
so good.
But you were fairly direct on like what you wanted, and I sometimes feel like Instagram that designers are better at it than like classic photographers because you're setting a scene. So when you go to a restaurant like that, are you just sitting and waiting for the waiter to walk by or for the bartender to make a drink and there not to be anyone there, or are you asking them to do things?
Oh no, it's very rare that I ask people to do things. I mean, I'm not afraid to, but I would rather let it be like a natural moment. I usually have a really good idea when I enter a space, like what I want out of this or like what my limitations are. Because I shoot on an iPhone, like I know that the lighting needs to be right in the first place as opposed to being able to like have a little bit more leeway because the camera is better. So I know which part of the space is going to work well on my phone. I know what I need in terms of like how many people, like give or take, like to make the space feel right in the photo, but also not just like clutter it up. And to your point, like and it's also just a shot that I love is like a beautiful bar, like mostly empty bar stools because the bar stools are usually like pretty as objects. Maybe a person or two there to show that there's some life there, and then like the bartender like shaking in action. It's my graphic mind thinking of like the construction of all of the elements in the piece. So what I'll do is just look like an idiot for like 10 minutes until I like get the shot that I like know is there. Or like, maybe if the lighting is right, like the motion blur of somebody walking by, I'll kind of have like a few ideas of like how this shot could work, and I'll just continue like taking a bunch of shots. And ultimately it's just about take as many shots as you can, and ultimately if you've taken enough, like one is going to be the right thing.
I think patience is a vastly underestimated value, like or trait that a good photographer should have, is that because sometimes you do have to sit there for 10 minutes and be like, I know at some point he's going to be mixing a drink and a waiter is going to walk by.
Right. And like those two people, they're paying their check, they're going to get up soon. I don't want them in the shot. Like it's going to happen. Yeah, definitely patience, and also being willing to be a little bit, the embarrassment of just sort of like standing in the middle of the room wielding a camera is valid.
Right.
And willing to, just deal with that.
It's easier to get over that embarrassment when you have 500,000 followers on Instagram.
It is, but it's still embarrassing. It can be,
Back when I used to shoot more and I'd stop people on the street sometimes, and at the time I had one of the largest Tumblr followings as a photographer in the world. This is early social media days, but I would lie and say I was shooting for GQ because people were like,
you're like, why should I stop for you?
Right, and they'd be like, I was like, can I take your photo? And they'd be like, for what? And I'd be like, my blog. And they'd be like, no. And so then I just started being like, oh, it's for GQ. And they're like, oh.
Like, oh, okay.
Let's do this, And like, I had submitted a couple photos.
And maybe it showed up on GQ. You never know. Yeah.
But I think having that is probably like, and I'm sure sometimes you go into a restaurant and they ask, what's it for? Or something in this. And you're like, oh, yeah, this is Instagram. And then they're like, oh, my God, you're Patrick.
Or no, sometimes they're like, oh, no, you need to talk to our communications manager. And I'm like, it's going to be a great photo, I promise. But like, maybe, I guess I'm just not going to document it because you won't let me like sit here and take a photo, which happens for sure. But to that point too, sometimes I will, you're asking like, what are the things I do to get this photo? Sometimes I know, for instance, that like a beautiful dark restaurant at night is going to be super lovely to like eat dinner in, but it's not going to take a good photo. So I have at times, if I know that I've wanted to document a photo because I sort of like understand its place in the spectrum of New York of dining, I will then maybe make arrangements to go in early, document the photo during the daylight hours, like take a beautiful shot of the food, and then actually like have my dining experience later. That's also something I do, knowing, so that is like the strategic part, but it's all still within like, that period of time.
Is that something that you feel like you can do a bit easier now because you have such a large following, you're so well known? Or is that something, even if you were kind of more on the up and up, that it's worth emailing and asking?
Oh, it's certainly worth emailing and asking. I mean, every restaurant is different. Like, there may be a restaurant that, whether or not they know that I have a large following, is just going to be like, no, you need to like figure it out ahead of time, and like, or like no social media, whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, obviously we're in this time where social media is increasingly important to, the financial health of a business. And so there'll probably be more places I feel like would be open to you coming in, as long as it doesn't cost them a lot of money for like staff and like preparing something, like coming in a little early to shoot something. I'm sure they would be open to it. So it's definitely worth asking.
You probably get taken care of at dinner then too, right?
I mean, sometimes. I mean, I've gotten to the point where like one of the things that I've made a pretty distinct point of, and maybe a little less than food, but more increasingly with food and restaurants, is like, I'm not going to guarantee that I'm going to post about you. So like, if you want to comp my meal, I want to let you know you're welcome to do that, but I don't guarantee necessarily posting. I would actually much rather know about, I get like press releases all the time for, fashion and food and whatnot. I would much rather like know about it and have it on my radar, and then when I'm ready to go experience it, if it's something that I've truly enjoyed or, appreciated that experience, then I'm happy to document it. And if it's like done in, if I can capture it in a nice way, then I feel like it's a much more valuable exchange, and I'm like happy to pay for the meal.
Totally.
Yeah, ultimately.
And to your point, you're not a critic in that, like, you're not putting negative stuff out
right.
there. You're not like, oh, like misses the mark, like 3 out of 5. So you're only going to post if you really love it.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times when I've sort of like, I've given a little bit of like criticism. I try not to do that. It's just, it's a hard medium to do that with.
Right.
And that's not really my place. I feel like if something is already sort of received as a really great thing, whether it's food or fashion, whatnot, then there's a little bit more leverage to sort of, to show a little bit more interpretation of like how I feel. But I will never now post about something that I just think is like not worth it, because ultimately by posting it, it's getting attention, and I want to provide attention to places that I think deserve it.
And your followers will likely go.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they're like, oh wait, he told me to go here.
Well, it was funny, just literally, I think it was just last night, I posted this new place in New York, Chinese tuxedo.
I went there
somebody, and it's great.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's a perfect restaurant, and if we got into a conversation, I could tell you like the ins and outs, but generally I recommend it. I think it's like the restaurant that especially if I'm visiting New York, that's like what I want a New York Manhattan restaurant to be.
Right. I don't need to go spend $500 on my Chinese food tonight, but
right. But like if I'm visiting and I can like have this like sumptuous experience buried in Chinatown, it's great. Somebody literally asked me on my feed, I'm thinking about going in a couple weeks, do you recommend? Mm-hmm. And I was like, if it's on my feed, then I recommend.
Yeah.
Like that's the short answer.
Right. Going back to just iPhone, how you're traveling,
mm-hmm.
you don't bring a photographer with you.
I don't bring a photographer with me.
How are you getting the shots?
A couple ways. A classic is stopping somebody on the street and being like, can you take the photo? And they're like, oh, sure, I can take a photo for you. And then I'm like, okay, and you need to stand here. And they're suddenly,
like, I hope you don't have anything to do
seconds later, they realize what they've gotten themselves into. And I try to I try to infuse it with a little levity and also just like not take over their lives for too long. Mm-hmm. But I'm not afraid to ask somebody on the street.
Okay.
I have a tripod, and I have like a little Bluetooth clicker, so I can like set it up like. I have this classic shot where I'm like walking towards the camera, like staring straight down the barrel. I love it. On like a cobblestone street in Soho or at the beach in Bahamas. Favorite.
There was one of you coming out of the water, like James Bond style recently.
Yeah, exactly. I love that photo. It was a good one.
It's good.
That one my boyfriend took.
Okay.
So it does help when you have a significant other.
Yes.
That's new, so that hasn't been happening for long.
That's nice.
We'll see how long it lasts.
Right.
Knock on wood.
That's marble.
Okay, there we go. We can hope. but that's nice. Having the tripod is actually really nice because there's not another person there like drawing attention to what you're doing, and more often than not, people don't actually realize that you're taking a photo. If you're standing on a street in, well, probably anywhere, but in New York City, this happens all the time. When I thought that like New Yorkers would be just like more oblivious, if somebody's shooting you, like they're here, you're like against the wall, whatever it is, people like stop like timidly and like wait and like just keep walking and like maybe I want you blurring through the photo or like whatever. You would think that in New York they just like wouldn't care, but people are just way too cautious. When you have a tripod, they don't even notice it's there, and they just like keep walking. They probably look at you and they're like, "What? Right. Like, what is he doing, standing there, like like with his pose?" But using a tripod is
So you have just
key.
like a normal full size tripod that.
Yeah, and it has like a little adapter to hold the iPhone that you screw into the top of the tripod. Perfect. Yeah, no, it's actually, because I had a cheaper one that wasn't doing the trick. It was fine, but I needed one that was a little more substantial, so I went to B&H Camera and got like a not expensive one, but one that I felt was good.
And
still like slim.
Does it collapse down
not tiny. I mean, it's like, it can fit in like a larger bag that I have, yeah.
And do you bring that around when you know I don't have something to like.
Yeah, there'll be like a morning when I'm like, I want to document this, or like it's a particularly, like it's snowing out. I did a snowing like video one recently that I used a tripod. If I know that I'm gonna want to take a photo, or sometimes if I'm traveling, I'll bring it with me.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Apps. What do you you don't have to give away all your secrets.
Well, I mean, hey, again, level playing field. Right? We all have the same tools. I'm happy to give away any secrets that you think I might have.
First of all, wait. That's like being like, we all have a set of genes. We don't all like look like you know? Like, yes, we all have the same tools.
Okay, let me say that I did spend like, 10 years of my life before I even knew that, before Instagram even existed, as a graphic designer.
Okay.
Like, I knew Photoshop. I know the basic principles behind design and photography and like color correction and that sort of things. So it definitely like helped me, but whatever. Like there are a lot of peers that I have who are amazing at what they do. It's not that hard to learn. But the key is knowing what you want to get out of the photo. If you know what you want to get out, then you can like trace back the tools to use to get there.
And as you're saying, you walk into a space and you kind of have an idea of what you want to get.
Well, and I also know I know the vision that I'm having, and when I take a photo, I know how it's falling short, right? Like that's part of what I think, kind of going back to this idea of like, what is Instagram meant to me? I picture the world in these like little moments, and I know like how sort of an idealist I can be about like how I'm experiencing this. And so then if I can take a photo and express that visually, which is all this whole thing about the highlights of what I'm doing and like always being the best moments in the best photo, it's really about expressing that sort of like ideal moment that I'm experiencing. So when I see a photo, I know what's lacking to make it feel like what I was experiencing.
And I feel like you've been shooting with this camera, the iPhone, for how long now?
Yeah, like 5 years. I mean, for even longer. So I know
there is like this symbiosis that happens where it's like you can start to see the world through the camera. Right? Like
I know. Well, I know exactly how it's going to capture it, and I know a distance that it needs to get the thing that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And so apps, ViscoCam and Snapseed.
Right.
I mean, I use every once in a while. I've used Facetune like 3 times. There's actually this fun one called Juxtapose. Have you ever used that one?
No.
The best thing about it is you can put 2 photos on top of each other. And I'll do this sometimes when I have 2 photos that are super similar, but there's like a problem in one of them and then like a different problem in the other one. I'll lay them on top of each other and I can kind of like erase part of one and juxtapose 2 images on top of each other.
So you got a great photo, but there's like some weird thing over here on this one and weird thing over here on this one.
Yeah, exactly. Or like this perfect photo, but like my face is just like not right.
Right.
And so I can use a photo that was just later, that the rest of the photo was wrong, but my face was right. And then like get it. So that's the extent that I go to like some like photoshopping
that's not
weird.
That much.
It's not that weird. And it's all on the iPhone, which I think is super fun.
Yeah.
Like using the tools on the iPhone.
It's amazing to see all, like the people that, because I don't, I'm Photoshop, whatever. So I'm not great at the iPhone, but to see people who are good at it, just like going through the apps and like,
It's so fun.
Whoa.
It's so fun.
And so on Snapseed, are you doing a lot of the more, because they have some more advanced stuff of like the spot.
They're getting more and more. Okay, so the spot correction is one of their original features. They recently introduced curves. So that just like Photoshop.
Wow.
It's so good. So I always had a problem like color correcting because they're just honestly there actually wasn't a way in Snapseed at all, and I would use another app that just like wasn't really good either. But with curves, you can get into like all of the different color levels and everything.
So like I need to take reds out of the shadow.
Yep. You can do it all, just like on Photoshop. And they also just introduced one expand, which is the opposite of crop, which I used to use a different app for this and I forget what it was. But anyway, you can like, if it'll like programmatically understand what is on the outside. So if you have like something that's long landscape and you need like more space on the top and the bottom to get it square or something like that, you can like use that to expand it. It doesn't always get it right. It depends. Like it's easiest when like the things are pretty like, simple.
You could see like you're in front of the ocean.
Yeah, and it can probably extrapolate
and more sand on the bottom.
Yeah, that one's fun.
That's cool.
So Snapseed is super powerful. I love the filters in ViscoCam, and actually I weirdly like how it does like the brightening. So I use that a lot.
That's pretty simple though.
Simple stuff on ViscoCam, and then like more intricate stuff on Snapseed.
And your stuff, again, you don't have the kind of consistency of content that some influencers do, in that they're just like every day at 8 a.m. it's a full body shot, and then at noon it's a detail, and then at 4 p.m. it's something from my day.
I didn't even realize that people I don't pay that much attention.
Yeah.
It really is about like what am I doing right now,
right.
And like what am I experiencing, and this is a beautiful image and I want to post it. Every once in a while I'll look at my feed and I'll be like, why did I post that one there? Because it's like on top of the one that like makes it look weird.
But you don't have like the two feeds going on where you
no
plug photos?
No, I mean I'll kind of use ViscoCam for that because it kind of has the grid. It's not perfect, but I only do that like lightly, and I honestly like end up like I don't really care too much about it.
Right.
I probably should. I mean honestly, not to.
Right.
People, you should like the more that you can be like specific and tactical. I think that it's probably valuable. It's valuable, but at the same time, like that's not really what I'm in the game for.
Right,
The
difference for you is again that you don't get 10 hours a day to do this.
Right. That's very true.
I
get maybe like 20 minutes a day to do it.
That is so impressive because again, this used to be a big part of my life, and it's not anymore. And I sit in an office for 10 hours a day, and my excuse is always now like, well, I sit in an office for 10 hours.
Yeah, totally. Like, where are you gonna? Yeah, where are you gonna shoot if you're in this?
Every day I take the same walk to work, and I sit in my office, and then I leave. And you're doing a similar thing.
I mean, to that point, it's then important to it's important for me to push myself because I actually do. To your point of sitting in an office for 10 hours a day, like you have to push yourself to get out. So it's still important for me that despite the fact that even when I'm, like in the Bahamas on vacation and probably emailing a lot of the time, it's still important for me to push myself to have the experiences, to go out of my way to maybe take a different way to work, to visit a new restaurant that I haven't been to maybe go a little earlier in order to get a shot that I want. Like I still find that I have to push myself, and ultimately, that's also the reason that I have so many other projects that I'm involved in. It's not the reason that I have these projects in order to like post them on my Instagram feed, but they all work really well together. Like I have the liquor cabinet, I have Spring Street Social Society. I have to make sure that when I'm doing these other things that I think are beautiful and interesting, that I take the time to stop and document them. But ultimately, it's all about being able to find all of the opportunities to bring that content into what I'm doing.
And that is where your consistency comes from, again, which is so interesting because some influencers, it's either like, this is what I do every day, I post a photo of my outfit, or it's like, here's the tones I use. I'm all gray, or I'm all pinks, or I'm all
I admire that a lot. Yeah. It's not how I am.
But yours
like I can't.
It still feels like when I see your photo, it's like, oh, that's
like I have a certain way of shooting, and I have a certain thing that I like, and a vantage point, and a way of editing. And so it is important to like always have that initial clue of like, know that you're seeing one of my photos.
But it's not as in your face as like, oh, every photo is kind of gray or white
Right.
or red.
Or like, yeah, exactly.
You know, so yeah, that's it's interesting that, and maybe part of that is just a time thing of like, you follow you for long enough, you start to understand your like vibe.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, if that's the case, then it means that somebody's really kind of getting to know me in this one particular way, and that's the goal for me.
So, sponsored content. This is something that, the influencers that are watching, there's a lot who are doing a lot of work with brands. There's a lot who want to do a lot more work with brands. Just walk through a little bit of when did you start working with brands and getting paid? I think that's a question everyone has. It's just like, they want to make money off this. They're putting a lot of time and effort into it, and they want to make some money off of it. When did that start happening for you? And kind of in the beginning, were you taking a lot of stuff? And then what is your kind of philosophy? You've touched on it a little bit, but tightening it up, like, what's your philosophy in working with brands now?
Just sort of like nuts and bolts. I probably had I'm guessing 50, 60,000 followers or something, 70,000 followers. I don't remember. The first job that I ever got that was paid was for Travel and Leisure. They did a Capital One campaign, which is interesting because I mean, anything like a financial service or, businessy kind of things like that are maybe a little tougher in order to take on as a partner. But even then, the content was all about your New York City bucket list. So it was a picture of pizza at Grimaldi's, and it was a photo of Central Park, things that I was already shooting. And when I found out that was a creative brief, I'm like, absolutely, I can build in this messaging because it's something that I truly believe in. And that's something that I definitely carry with me to this day. Ultimately, am I going to say yes or no to a client? There are a number of factors involved, but the biggest one is do I love this? Would I use it? Is this a part of my life already, or would it be? And if I feel really good about that, then that's kind of the biggest litmus test to if I'm going to say yes or no. And I think it's really important to understand that one, when you're starting to get these things initially, whether it's for trade or paid, awesome, dip your toe in, figure it out, see how it goes. But also don't be afraid to say no, because it's always been very important to me to sort of craft the place that the brand that I'm creating. And even though I never saw myself as a brand, I always felt very strongly about the authenticity with which I was bringing in partners into the things that I was already doing. And because I've always seen Instagram as my life, a reflection of my life, then it was important that, that all kind of made sense together.
And that idea of and I think that the world as it is now, it can feel a little eye-rolly to be talking about your personal brand, but I think it's important. You have this thing that basically your brand is this thing that you can check things against and say does this make sense? And should I say no or should I say yes? Because when money starts getting thrown at you, it gets harder and harder to say no.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And I think if you haven't developed that idea, what is the idea of a guy named Patrick and a man about town? Would he do this thing? Do you have to kind of separate? And again, it is your life, so maybe you have to do less of that. But do you have that thing where you say is this right? Can I separate the money they want to pay me from the idea of do I feel like this matches?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you always have to ask that question, right? For me, it's also about understanding what's the goal. For me, the long-term goal, I never really sought out to become a quote-unquote influencer on Instagram. I've always been passionate about having a platform to advocate for the things that I love and being an ambassador for beautiful things, and feeling like I have something to say in the realm of taste and style. That's something that I've always been interested in. Hopefully that extends for a very long time, both on Instagram and on other platforms. So understanding that there's a long game that I'm also considering, and not just sort of the immediate, dollar to be earned, then those are all things that kind of enter into that equation.
And you came into this thing after years of working in corporate jobs and magazines and things like that, and starting your own businesses. a lot of the influencers, they're like 18, 20,
Yeah,
23. Maybe they haven't had a job. Maybe they've kind of fallen into this world. And is there anything that you think, as somebody who has a little more experience, like advice for dealing with brands, for cultivating those relationships, for, again, if you don't have that kind of business sense baked in, that you obviously have some things that work well for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing just sort of practically is to really treat this professionally. Like these are companies, brands, agencies that have teams of people who are spending lots of time to put these campaigns together, reaching out, spending money or gifting product, and in exchange, they expect a level of professionalism in which you show that you're able to step up to the plate and deliver what they're asking for, or say no, or have a really a professional conversation about what's happening, but also continuing to show your personality, which is totally fine. Yeah, I mean, to your point, I have experienced the client relationship for decades at this point. My background is graphic design, and for the longest time I was a freelancer working at so many different agencies and working for myself, and I know what it means to go back and forth and have a client want something different than maybe what you thought, and ultimately it's
which is a hard thing, right? When you put yourself into something and then they come back and say, oh yeah, that wasn't really what we were thinking, and you're like, idiot, this is
right.
better than what we were thinking.
Yeah, you have no idea.
Yeah. But you have to temper that a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly, and it's always a conversation, for sure. And ultimately too, I think it's fantastic if you're 18 or 23 and you're young and you're able to have these opportunities. That's fantastic. I do think that it's really important, and some part of the decision making that I am able to do has to do with the experience that I've had. I mean, I'm 35, so I don't think we've said my age. So I'm not young. I've had a good bit of experience culturally, professionally, and so all of those things I feel like have been really valuable in terms of being able to make the decisions that I'm making, and enabling me to structure the deals that I'm making, having that sort of qualitative analysis of what am I posting, what am I not posting, how am I positioning myself. Yeah, so real life is just as important as showcasing what you're doing. Show life.
Yeah. By the way, you're absolutely slaying this.
Oh, thank you.
But, another quick question on that. We talk a lot about relationships. You mentioned to me before that you are trying to do more with less brands.
Mm-hmm.
How much, we met your lovely business manager, who's obviously helping you manage and grow the business, but how much relationship building are you doing? It's something we talk a lot about in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Just these brands, essentially, it boils down to their people. There is a person at Banana Republic
Yep.
that you work with, that you have that relationship. There's a person at each brand, or a group of people, or a small team or something. But how much relationship building are you doing, and kind of how do you think about that?
It's all about relationships. And one of the things that is great about being in New York City is that this is where the center of everything is happening. Or Los Angeles, a lot of big cities, but I think especially for media, PR, advertising, New York City is such a great place. Especially when I was really just starting out, every opportunity that I had was meeting for coffee, going to an event, and not necessarily having an agenda. It's not about I'm going to this event because it's this brand and I'm gonna get a campaign with them, but knowing that meeting people, having that connectivity. Right. In the city like this is really just how it works. And so building relationships has been super key. I'm fortunate now that I have a team of people that can help me either initiate those relationships or continue to build those relationships. You said I have a business manager, and she's the person who I really rely on to really cultivate relationships that I've started, or sort of with clients that we've been working with for a long time. So I'm fortunate to have people around me who can help with that. But it's important to find the right person to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, and if you're just starting out, it's really just like get out there, meet people.
And the events thing is such a good point, I think, is that like, because as a brand person, you want your event to be successful and you want people to show up. And just showing up and being like, hi, you don't even have to post a photo. And especially now with Insta stories and all these other ways to cover
It's easy, yeah, exactly. It's easy to showcase it, to give a little love back.
Right.
And also, yeah, exactly, just to show up is a great thing.
Well, thank you. That was incredible. One,
Yeah.
I don't want to leave this apartment.
I'm glad you like it. It's
beautiful. But thank you so much. That was amazing. And I think we've had so many fashion-focused influencers, and it's increasingly our clients want people that are more than just influencers. And that sounds disparaging to influencers, but it's about having a full life.
Yeah, it's about being real.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think you are the epitome of that. That it seems like you get interested in things and then you just do them.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, that's true. For better or for worse, to the chagrin of some. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an incredible lesson that just from the way you live your life that everybody can take, is that you can just try things, and you can just say, I want to create a secret society that does these crazy events. And I'm sure when you started that with your partner, you had no idea of how you were actually going to pull that off, or if people were going to be interested.
Yeah, I didn't know what I was going to do. I just started with one thing. I didn't know how crazy it was going to be to continue it. But yeah, it's really just about, taking the plunge, starting something, and sticking to it, which is the hardest thing.
It is. And congratulations, you're 4.5, 5 years in now, almost to that. And congratulations on all your success.
Thank you.
And thanks
I
for
appreciate it.
sitting down.
Yeah, it's
Cheers.
great chatting.
Yeah.
This whiskey was delicious. Thanks.